Hi, I'm Lisa Hamilton, member of the pastoral team here at Christ Church, Montevideo. We're in the season of Lent, and today we're on week 4 of 6 weeks. During this time, we've been observing Jesus' life, remembering moments and words, and wanting to learn what it means to prepare our hearts for the mystery of Easter. Easter is the biggest mystery of our faith, and our faith is mystery. The word Lent means lengthen. So during this time, it's a time to lengthen our faith or to grow in our faith, a time to prepare our hearts. We've heard from Nate and from John about the preparation and the process of Jesus. And today, I want to talk with you about the presence of Jesus. So, we're on the 4th Sunday of Lent. In Wonderland, today's story is on Jesus going into the desert. And we say he went to the desert to find out more about who he was and what his work was going to be. A desert? Why a desert? Think about it. How do we find out who we are? One way is limits, the existential limits that you find easily in a desert of basic needs, life and death, and also purpose. We don't really know who we are or what we're made of until we've come up against some limits. On the Camino de Santiago, John and I passed by a mile marker where one of the pilgrims had written a phrase that caught my attention. It said, "A pilgrim learns what he is not." After that day, I started making a list of everything I was learning that I wasn't. And it was pretty long by the end of that 36-day walk. Limits happen to us in many ways. Maybe someone tells you something difficult about yourself. Maybe you get sick, or there's an accident or a tragedy that changes your life. Maybe you are faced with something you cannot do, or someone you cannot change. In Godly Play, we also say we have to have a little piece of the desert in our room because so many important things happen to the people of God there. So what is a desert in our life today? Anything that makes us question ourselves. The disciples were living in a desert as they accompanied Jesus to Jerusalem. There were so many things happening that they didn't understand. They watched him do things like overturn the tables in the temple. Or they heard him tell them exactly what to expect when he gave them instructions about preparing the Last Supper. How did he know those things? They heard him say confusing words like, "This is my body, broken for you." Or telling Peter, "You will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows." And Jesus said, "One of you will betray me." And then Jesus invited them out into the night to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray with him. And he said, "Pray with me so that you will not fall into temptation." What was Jesus meaning by all of these things? In last year's Bible study of Luke, my group became very curious about this verse, Luke 22:45. When he, Jesus, rose from prayer and went back to the disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. What sorrow was making them exhausted? The disciples were already exhausted, and the tragic events of that night hadn't even happened yet. They were starting on a disadvantage. He found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. Do you feel exhausted? What from? These times are exhausting. Work from home means no boundaries between work and home. Kids are home from school studying online. The COVID contagions and numbers going up and up and up, and the fight for life. News, 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 news. It's exhausting. We have experienced loss of many kinds. Are you exhausted from sorrow? Well, what does it mean to be exhausted? I looked it up in the dictionary, and here's what I found. Exhausted is an adjective. It's a descriptive word. It means to be drained of one's physical or mental resources, very tired, or of resources or reserves completely used up. Exhaustion is dangerous. It puts us on the edge. Emotional strain is more exhausting than physical strain. I think the disciples' bodies were telling them something they had not recognized yet. They were emotionally exhausted from all these desert experiences they were having with Jesus, which were so disorienting. How about you? Are you aware of what your body is saying? And if you are, what is it saying? Our weakness, our human frailty, is a limit. Some people know that limit well because they have a persistent illness or a weakness or a limitation of some kind. Other people are full of energy and strength and health, but they are limited as well. We are all limited. It's human nature to want to try to ignore our limitations. We want to carry on. We want to get everything done. We want to meet all the expectations, but we're limited, and eventually our limits will catch up with us. I invite you today to know yourself a little better so that you can know God better. St. Augustine wrote in the year 400, "How can you draw close to God when you are far from your own self?" Limits give us opportunity to feel shocked, disappointed, angry, frustrated, depressed. Emotions make us us. They make us human. In our Tuesday conversations about anxiety and addiction, we realize that one of the main sources of anxiety is not being able to talk about how we feel or what causes us to feel the way we feel. And actually, that's the root of the word addiction. Addiction means what is not said or what is left unsaid. Our emotions have so much to teach us about us. We learn a lot about who we really are when we begin to allow ourselves to feel, to acknowledge how we feel. I used to say to my kids, if you don't talk about how you feel, you're going to act out how you feel, and then maybe you'll get in trouble. All emotions are created by God for a reason. Why? They are the way and the place that God can speak to us. When we connect emotionally, we connect with ourselves, and that allows us to connect with God. In a book called The Cry of the Soul, Dan Allender and Tremper Longman wrote, "Ignoring our emotions is turning our back on reality. Listening to our emotions ushers us into reality. And reality is where we meet God. Emotions are the language of the soul. They are the cry that gives the heart a voice. However, we often turn a deaf ear through emotional denial, distortion, or disengagement. We strain out anything disturbing in order to gain tenuous control of our inner world. We are frightened and ashamed of what leaks into our consciousness. In neglecting our intense emotions, we are false to ourselves and lose a wonderful opportunity to know God. We forget that change comes through brutal honesty and vulnerability before God. We are emotional beings, and we are spiritual beings. That's where faith comes in. But how can we really describe what that means? Rather than describe it, we're meant to live it, to experience it, to get it. God has given us a totally natural way to connect with ourselves and with Him. Breathing. Breathing is connection with God. I heard Richard Rohr describe it like this. God's name in Hebrew is Yahweh. The vowels in His name denote our natural breathing pattern. Yahweh is like breathing. Yahweh, Yahweh. And if we don't pronounce any of the consonants, that is how we breathe. So do it with me. God has given us a way to say His name over and over and over again during our day. The first word we ever pronounce in that sense is God's name. And the last thing we'll say on our deathbed is God's name. Think about that. Breathing connects us physically, spiritually, and emotionally. God has designed us to be whole. Do you know that just 5 minutes of calm, deep breathing can reset our emotional state? That's a gift. We see a pattern repeated in the Bible. When we're stressed or upset, anxious or afraid, God's answer, His solution, is His presence. So what is presence? It's a noun. It means the state or fact of existing, occurring, or being present in a place or thing. On a recent podcast called Unhurried Living, I listened to an interview with Diana Groover, who wrote a book on a limit many of us experience, depression. She said, depression touches your spiritual life. Depression is isolating. We think that what people need is a cure, but what people really need is someone to be with them. God is with us in the darkness. God keeps company with us. And then she gave a recommendation based on her own experience. She said, the most helpful thing is not obsessing over my faith, that frantic feeling of introspection. What did I do wrong? Why am I ending up depressed like this? What can I do to get out of it? But actually to keep myself anchored in God's faithfulness to me. So what can you do when you find yourself in a desert to anchor yourself in God's faithfulness? For me, Scripture is totally alive, and it is so helpful in these moments. Listen to this promise from Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. That is presence. I want to tell you a story. I had just woken up and I was feeling especially heavy this day. I was feeling discouraged and disappointed, alone. I had huge challenges ahead of me on that day, actually on that week. And so I just had that heaviness as I got up that morning. I took a deep breath and served my coffee, sat down in my usual place where I have my quiet time in the morning, and just looked out the window. As if on cue, my Great Dane, Fiona, came right over to me and sat next to me, almost on top of me. And I heard it. I am here. God was saying to me through my dog that he understood and that he was here with me. Nothing had changed, but everything had changed. My body loosened. I gave her a big hug. And then she turned around and asked me for her morning face rub, which is her routine, usually at like 9:30 in the morning. Have you ever gotten a message like that from God? Maybe not through your dog, but through some other circumstance in your life. God is close. He's closer than our next breath. Psalm 34 has many verses in it that speak of God's presence like that. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. The deserts in our lives are times and places where we see who we really are. We may feel ashamed, crushed, in trouble, brokenhearted. But friends, a problem with God is always an opportunity, and that is not a cliche. When we see who we really are, we have an opportunity to lengthen our faith, to grow, to learn about ourselves, to decide to change in preparation for whatever may come. Whatever your desert is today, Jesus' last words, whose name is Emmanuel, which means God with us. His words were for his disciples and also for you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age.